Imagine your voice had just been taken away. Your ability to speak was gone. What would you do if you had to communicate information? Important information. You would write it down. You would write it down in a series of notes. Note number 1 read, Polly and the kids are not safe. Note number 2, don't leave me like this. Note number 3, I know who did this. And note number 4, thank you for the offer, but I won't need it. One man affected so many lives. So many people's journeys interrupted by this one man. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Okay, I've got a crackers story for you. This is full out true crime madness, this story. Never heard of the person in this story, and the more I went into it, the more I was like, oh my god. The further I dug, the worse it got, as you will hear as it goes on. But before I get to it, let me do just a couple of quick shout outs. So, there's a very special 70th birthday coming up, and it's Patty Tallman. Hello, Patty, a listener to the podcast. I just want to say happy birthday. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have an amazing 70th Patty. And secondly, hello to Matt. Matt Maruzio sent me a lovely message on Instagram. Thanks, Matt. Nice to hear from you. And thanks for signing off, Senor Maruzio. Very exotic. Okay, thank you if you've been in touch. As always, lovely to hear from you. Okay, let's get to the story. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. When Wanda Medeiros was a young woman living in Falmouth, Cape Cod, she had her whole life ahead of her. So, Wanda, just in her early 20s, she had been born and raised in the city of Falmouth. And this is where she lived with her family. Now at age 21, she's out in a bar, and she meets a man who is also a resident of Falmouth. His name is Melvin Rainey. Rain as in R-E INE, not as in the purple stuff that Prince sang about. So Melvin, what's his deal? Well, Melvin owns a trash pickup business, and it's quite a big business that he's got. His company had major contracts all over Cape Cod, and Melvin had started this business really just on his own with a truck, hired a couple of people, and they would go round business to business in this truck picking up the bins from small businesses, and he had grown this into something really big. He was wealthy from this. You know, he had a lot of employees. Now, when Wanda meets Melvin, she's heard tale of Melvin. Everyone has heard tale of Melvin because he is a bad boy. He is a troublemaker who has had plenty of run-ins with the law. Around the Falmouth area, he'd been arrested lots of times for fighting with people, having illegal weapons. He'd been involved in burglaries. But the main thing about Melvin is his history of arson attacks. In fact, Melvin Rainey had so many arson attacks that he even had a catchphrase that everyone in the Falmouth area knew. And his catchphrase was this: I smell smoke. Now, not exactly the most difficult code to crack there, Melvin, but when Melvin used these words, I smell smoke, he used them as a warning. This was a warning to people that something bad was coming their direction, and that something bad would appear in the form of a fire. If you upset Melvin in any way and he wanted to get back to you, he would look you in the eyes and he would say, I smell smoke. Guaranteed, within a couple of days, your house, your business would be up in flames. Now in the area, lots of bar owners, shopkeepers, small businesses who'd all had arguments with Melvin would hear him say 3 famous words, and that was it. Now here's the thing about Melvin. Everyone knew he was an absolute beast. People were scared of him. When Melvin walked into a bar, people lowered their eyes because you just didn't want to get into anything with him. Because, like I say, literally, your house would be burned to the ground days later. Residents would say it was kind of like we knew to avoid him. No one wanted to be caught either talking to him or caught talking about him because you knew you would feel his anger. What a dick. Let's just agree now, Melvin is a massive dick. He is a bad person. He is what Billy's Eyelids would call an absolute bad man. Do-do, do-do, you know that song? Do-do, do-do, that's what she was singing about. He is a bad man. So now when Wanda meets him, she knows all of this. She's heard tale of all of this. But, and I feel like every true crime story says this about the bad man, he was a charmer. This is what one Falmouth resident had to say. He was charming and dangerous all at the same time. If Melvin wanted to make you feel safe, you would feel incredible. But if he wanted to threaten you, you would be left shaking. So in 1963, Melvin is in his mid-30s, Wanda her early 20s, and they marry. And on the day of her wedding, Wanda has no idea that 8 years later she will become Case File 156 DFME, because Wanda is going to disappear. She's made a massive mistake in marrying Melvin, and over the next 8 years they have 2 sons, but they raise them in a very, very unhappy home. Melvin is incredibly short-tempered. He's forever having a go at Wanda about everything. He is a real piece of work, and he makes her life an absolute misery for the time that they're married. And everyone in her family is saying to her, Wanda, you need to leave, you need to get out of this. But he's got a hold over her. Now, to police in Falmouth, as I've said, Melvin was very, very well known. In fact, a few months before he'd married Wanda, he'd spent a couple of months in prison for one of his famed arson attacks. But this was the only time that they'd ever been able to actually get him on anything and get him into prison, because Melvin was crafty. You know, they could get him on this one attack that he'd done months before he met Wanda, but he was committing these attacks all over the place and never leaving a single bit of evidence. That is one thing that Melvin Rainey was incredible at. That is never leaving evidence, as we will see in the case of his wife. So it's a regular Tuesday in 1971. Now, Wanda, she works as a secretary for a local business. That is her job, Monday to Friday. And through the day, the kids sometimes go to a babysitter and sometimes they go to Wanda's mother. And on this particular Tuesday, that was a day for the babysitters. So in the morning, the kids are given to the babysitter. Wanda drops them off. And in the evening, Wanda doesn't arrive to collect her 2 young sons. They're aged 5 and 6. She just doesn't arrive to pick them up. So the babysitter calls the Rainey home. She gets Melvin on the phone and she says, Melvin, Wanda hasn't arrived to collect the kids. And he says, oh, that's because she's gone on a trip. I'll come and collect the boys. Gone on a trip where, Melvin? Well, he can't quite remember. All that he knows is that day, that morning, he had dropped her off at a bus stop and she said she was taking a trip. Okay, let's just break that down. This is literally what that call must have sounded like. So the babysitter would have been like, hi Melvin, Wanda hasn't arrived to pick up the kids. Melvin, that's because she's on a trip. Babysitter, what? She never mentioned that. She said she'd be back to collect them at the normal time in the evening. Melvin, well, she just decided today that she was going to go on a trip, so I dropped her off at a bus stop instead of work. I mean, I'm sure the babysitter is thinking what we're all thinking. What a load of pish. You are talking absolute nonsense, Melvin. Don't give us it, man. Melvin, Mr. I smell smoke. I smell a big liar, pantaloons on fire. You're at it. Now, when Wanda isn't seen for days and weeks, her family go through all of the steps, you know, the missing persons report, searches all over Falmouth, all the usual things. And police are involved in this search, of course they are. The young mother has just disappeared into thin air. But Melvin holds strong that she was taking a trip. And then he starts adding this. He starts saying, well, she must have decided to just run away. Now, why would she do that? No way, say her family. She loved her 2 sons. She's not about to just run away. Melvin is brought in for questioning by police. It yields nothing. A year passes. No sign of Wanda. Her family are convinced Melvin is to blame. Eventually police decide, okay, we do need to try something. We've questioned him, we've not gotten anywhere, let's try something else. So this is what they do. They go to the home of Melvin and Wanda and they dig up the patio area at the back of the couple's home to see if a body has been buried underneath it, and they find nothing. They rip up the garage floor, thinking maybe she's been buried there on the property. They find nothing. And it's a year after she's missing that she becomes case 156 DFMA, another missing person. And she's still that to this day. No sign of Wanda has ever shown up. Now, it doesn't take Melvin long to move on from his disappeared wife. In fact, it only takes Melvin a matter of weeks after Wanda's disappearance to begin dating again. This time, it's the 19-year-old girl next door, Shirley. He asks the 19-year-old Shirley if she will come round and help him with some babysitting for the boys, because, his wife's not around, so he's gonna need some help. And again, she knows the stories. Everyone knows the stories, but the Melvin Rainey charm works. Shirley is dating him. Her friends and family are saying to her, stay as far away as you can from this man. And she moves in with him. Unbelievable. So they're dating. She's living in the house. And enter into the story a completely and utterly innocent 16-year-old boy who doesn't know Melvin, doesn't know him at all. He just lives in the area. Now this 16-year-old boy, Jeff Flanagan, just your local neighbourhood boy, he makes the terrible mistake of having a crush on Shirley. Shirley is a few years older than him. He's 16, she's 19. He sees her about the town. He's got a bit of a crush on her. He typical teenage sort of talks about his sort of crush on her. Melvin gets word of this, and Melvin does not like this one bit. Now, this is an innocent 16-year-old teenage boy. He's no threat to Melvin, but that's not how Melvin sees it. He just doesn't like this at all. Nothing's ever happened between Shirley and Jeff Flanagan. Nothing has ever happened. This boy just fancies her from a distance. One day Jeff Flanagan just doesn't come home from school. Now he's 16, he's got a little bit of independence, he's got a part-time job, he's got a car, friends. His parents, they're not terribly worried when he doesn't come home from school. But as day sort of turns to night, they start to get concerned and they report it to the police. So a search begins. The following day, he's still not anywhere to be seen. He's never called his parents. Okay, now there's a bit more panic going on. On the third day, Jeff Flanagan is found floating dead in a pond. He had been shot in the back of the head and thrown into a pond. And where is this pond? It's It's right across from Melvin Rainey's house. Now police quickly work out who might have had an issue here with this boy. And of course, it's Melvin. They bring him in, they question him, and it goes nowhere. They can determine that the bullet in the back of Jeff Flanagan's head came from a particular type of revolver. They can determine that Melvin Rainey owns one of these revolvers. Now you would think that would be enough proof to seriously investigate Melvin here. But no, it just sort of goes away. And the death of this 16-year-old remains unsolved. Now I'm going to say something here about the Falmouth police, and it's really not an attack, okay? This is actually something they say themselves. They will say they are scared of Melvin, or the Falmouth Fox, as he's now being nicknamed. Officers will say this: we just avoided him, and we shouldn't have. But you've got to understand, this is their words, this guy could destroy your whole life if he wanted. He could burn your life to the ground, come after your family, your kids, and it's hard to admit it, but we were scared. And it's like a collective understanding in the police that you just look the other way with the Falmouth Fox. I hate that nickname, by the way. Fox, the Falmouth Fox. Fox to me, right? Maybe I'm wrong. Fox to me suggests sexy. And let me tell you, Melvin Rainey ain't sexy. Am I wrong in that? I mean, and I get Fox like sly. I get that, but I always think, he's a bit foxy. Means he's a bit sexy. I don't know. Maybe I'm dwelling on all the wrong things. So, I mean, also at the same time, you can understand that Falmouth residents had their objections to the fact that there was no real consequences here, because they're going, well, there's now a missing wife, a dead teenager found across from his house, and no consequences. Now, the police, right, it's not to say that because they were scared of him, that they just let him away with, absolutely everything. No, of course they didn't. They'd be the worst police force in the universe if they did that. But it really was a case of pick your battles. And one of the battles they did pick was one of his arson attacks. 2 houses in Falmouth had burned to the ground mysteriously. And these homes belonged to people who had gotten into an altercation with Melvin Rainey. And why did they go after him this time, the police, rather than just let this one go? Well, it's because when police arrive at these fires, there's no sign of Melvin Rainey, but there is a 17-year-old boy standing watching the fires. And police immediately apprehend the 17-year-old and they take him to the police station. Okay, so who is this? Well, he is a boy by the name Paul Allwart. He's a young Falmouth local guy who lived a bit of a troubled life. He had been kicked out of his home by his parents when he'd just turned 17. He came from a really unstable family and his home life was just an absolute nightmare. So he'd been sort of drifting through Falmouth with no purpose and nowhere to live. And when he's just drifting along, he happens to meet Melvin Rainey. And Melvin, because he's such a nice guy, he takes in the 17-year-old Paul, takes him under his wing. What he does is he brings him in, He lets him live in the home that he lives in with Shirley and the two kids. And the 17-year-old Paul, he gives him a job, part of his trash picking up company. So for a few months, Paul works alongside Melvin, and here he is, standing next to two houses on fire. So when Falmouth police bring Paul in and ask him, what has happened here? Did you start these fires? Paul will say, yeah, I did. I started these fires, but it's because Melvin asked me to. Or told me to. You see, Melvin had worked a kind of system where he'd said to the boy, I've brought you in, I've given you a home, I've given you a job, and now you need to do something in return for me. So Paul felt like he had no choice but to start these fires. So police agree this. They say to him, look, you won't be charged here if, and that's a big if you go to court and you testify that Melvin is the reason that these fires happened, that he put you up to it. At first Paul's like, no. Melvin will come after me, I'll end up dead. I'm just not doing it. Police say, no, it's fine, we will keep you safe. I promise, we will keep you safe. We'll move you out of Falmouth. We'll move you out of here until the court case. Once it's done, we can get him in prison and we can promise you will be safe. So reluctantly, he agrees. Paul says, okay, fine, I will. So for his safety, what police decide to do is they decide to put Paul on a boat to Martha's Vineyard. And it's just for a couple of weeks. It's just to hide out, essentially, until the case goes to court. Well, putting him on that boat is not going to protect him, sadly. Paul Allward gets on that boat, but he never gets off at the other side. He's on the boat when it sets sail, and not at the other side. Paul vanishes into thin air, and his body is never found. He is yet another unsolved disappearance connected to Melvin Rainey. Yet another person who's met a grisly end. It can only be assumed, and this is the general assumption, that Paul was murdered on the boat and thrown overboard. Otherwise, how you explain that he never got off the boat, I don't know. There was an investigation. There was a year-long search for Paul. Melvin Rainey was questioned by police. Nothing ever showed up, not a trace of this 17-year-old. Now, I've talked about the police fear, but something that springs up is possible police corruption. There are people in Falmouth who wonder, are the police protecting Melvin Rainey? The questions are asked. If they really wanted to find the missing wife, could they? Could they have looked more thoroughly in the year-long search? The body of Jeff Flanagan was found floating across from his house, shot with a bullet from a gun that they know he has, and yet there was no follow-up. And the boy who lived with him, set to go to court against him, vanishes under police protection, and yet they can't arrest him. And at no point do they bring in the FBI or a bigger police force. What I'm trying to say is Melvin was just allowed to carry on his reign of terror. See what I did there? See what I did? Reign of terror. Oh, brilliant. Now, the reason that I mentioned this police attitude is because we're going to get to the next part of the story. And we're going to really see the Falmouth Fox and the police in action. Melvin Rainey had a brother. Now, the brother was also known to everyone not a great guy at all. He wasn't quite as terrifying as Melvin, but he was unpleasant and he had very little regard for the police or authorities. So there's a day where the brother of Melvin is out and about. He's driving his car in the centre of town, not paying any attention to what he's doing, and he crashes into a police car. Oh dear. Now, this brother is such a dick. Just like Melvin, he expects I'll just walk away from this. But no. The police officer's car who he has crashed into is Officer John Busby, a 30-year-old police officer who is like, no. Just because you are the brother of Melvin Rainey, you're not just walking away. He doesn't like this one little bit. The brother, he is used to getting what he wants because he's part of the Rainey family. But this, John Busby is like, no, I am going to charge you for driving into my car. So he starts the paperwork. Guess who arrives moments after? Big brother Melvin. He's here to sort the situation out. Now, an argument starts immediately between John Busby and Melvin, but John Busby just will not back down. He's a really good police officer, and he's not scared of Melvin or his family, and he will uphold the law. Now, Melvin starts his usual bollocks. I can smell smoke. John Busby, in response, says, well, I can't. Melvin replies, oh, I can definitely smell smoke. It's like the candles burning at someone's funeral. Just to give you an idea of how much Melvin believes that he has a total grip of this town, he'll tell people, if you're ever pulled over by police, just tell them you're my relative. Just say to the police, you are a relative of Melvin Rainey, and the police will leave you alone. John Busby had, in his police career, encountered many people who said they were a Rainey family member. And it didn't deter John Busby. He knew it was bullshit. He wasn't scared. Well, John Busby, in this moment, might be doing the best job that he can, but he has no idea that by arresting Melvin Rainey's brother, he has just opened up a world of pain that will change the rest of his life. And so ends part 1.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on. Let's do it. Let's get it over.